Good morning and welcome. This is Michael Williams again. This is the fourth in our series of podcasts. This one's an interesting one. It's actually based on a Master of Letters thesis I did many, many years ago. And I've recently re-updated it, re-edited it, put a lot of new references, updated references, and republished it now under the same title of Sojourn in Your Native Land. It's quite an interesting overview of particularly market gardens from Sydney and their relations with their villages in southern China. The AI bots, as usual, do a very good job of giving a bit of a summary of this, which I hope you'll find interesting enough that you'll then go to ChideStudy Press and purchase the book if you want more details, a lot more details in the book itself, of course. One correction, the bots sometimes get pronunciations right. They don't know how to pronounce the word huaqiao. They keep pronouncing it huaqiao or huaqiao or something of that nature. When you hear that, just think of huaqiao. Literally means overseas Chinese. I use it quite a lot in my original text, and I still like to use the term, although you can substitute overseas Chinese if you like. So just to remember that, huaqiao, whenever you hear the AI bots talking about that. And I'll summarize a little bit at the end. I hope you enjoy.
It's amazing, the kind of weird little things you stumble across when you dig into history.
Yeah.
Like, picture this, right? You're in some tiny village in South China, and you find, like, this ancient safe just rusting away. And when you look closer, it's got Anthony Horton and Sons LPD stamped on it.
Wow. A Sydney department store in rural China. That's wild.
It is, right. Or how about this? The only clinic in the area was actually funded by a shopkeeper from Wollongong, way back when.
Seriously? Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Oh, and there's more. A medal, a real medal, awarded by Sun Yat-sen himself, given to some random Australian resident for supporting the Republic. It's like, what's going on here?
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? These strange little connections, almost like historical whispers.
Exactly, and those whispers, they're telling a much bigger story, one we're going to dive into today.
All right, let's do it.
We're talking about the history of Sydney's Chinese community, way back, those early days.
The huaqiao, right.
Yep, the huaqiao. And their links to their home villages in, specifically, the Pearl River Delta region of South China.
A region that, just for our listeners who might not be as familiar, has been a major source of Chinese immigration for centuries. It played a huge role in global Chinese history, really.
Huge, yeah. And we're focusing even more specifically within that region on the Zhongshan district.
Right, Zhongshan. Because what we're really interested in is this. How did they stay connected?
Yeah, how do they keep those ties going? I mean, we're talking thousands of miles, a whole ocean between them.
And not just the distance, but Australia at the time was actively trying to keep Chinese people out.
The White Australia policy,
Yeah.
right. Not exactly welcoming.
No, not at all. So how did they manage it? How did they keep those links alive? That's what we're trying to understand.
And we've got some amazing stuff to help us figure it out. Real primary sources straight from the archives.
Oh, yeah, the good stuff.
The big one, the one we keep coming back to, is the administrative files from the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901.
Right, that act, even though it was, let's be honest, super discriminatory.
Yeah.
It ended up creating this incredible record of these people's lives, their movements, their relationships. It's kind of ironic.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But those files are a gold mine of information.
Total gold mine. Names, dates, travel histories, even tiny details about their families back in China.
Wow.
It's all there.
And then, to really make it come alive, we've got something else. We've got oral history.
Oh, that's always so valuable. Hearing from the descendants, getting those personal stories.
It makes it so much more real,
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about some dry historical event.
Right.
It's about migration, family, belonging.
Those really universal human experiences, everyone can relate to that.
Absolutely. So let's start back at the beginning.
Okay, back to the start.
Why Zhongshan? Why were so many people leaving that one specific place to come to Sydney? What got this whole thing started?
Well, the initial spark, if you like, was gold.
Ah, the gold rush.
Yep. The Australian gold rushes in the 1850s, that's when you see the first big wave of folks coming over from the Pearl River Delta. And it's remarkable.
Go on.
By the late 19th century, a huge chunk of Sydney's Chinese community was specifically from Zhongshan.
Like how huge are we talking?
Well, some estimates put it around 40%.
40% all from one district.
One district. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
That's wild. So it was just the gold then, like get rich quick and go home.
Well, that was certainly part of it, that initial draw. But the reasons people were leaving the Pearl River Delta were often a lot more complicated.
More to it than just gold fever.
Yeah, a lot more. They were facing some really tough times back home.
Like what?
Well, there were these recurring famines, for one. Devastating.
Right.
And floods. I mean, massive floods that would wipe out entire crops, homes, everything.
Oh, wow.
And on top of that, there was a lot of civil unrest. Banditry was a big problem.
Yikes.
Yeah, and even full-blown warfare at times. It was rough.
So it sounds like they were almost pushed out as much as they were pulled to Australia.
Exactly. Desperation combined with that hope of something better, a real push and pull effect.
It makes sense, I guess. But you said earlier that other parts of China were also having a tough time back then.
They were.
So what made the Pearl River Delta different? Why were they the ones leaving in such big numbers?
That's a really important point. Unlike, say, some of the inland provinces, the southern coastal regions of China, like the Pearl River Delta, they already had this history of emigration.
Like a tradition of going overseas.
Exactly. For centuries, actually. They'd been going to places like Southeast Asia, setting up communities, making lives for themselves.
So the idea of going abroad wasn't so foreign to them.
Right. It was more of a known quantity, even if Australia was way further than they'd gone before.
And they had those strong family ties, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. Deeply rooted in their villages, those connections to their ancestors, their families.
So leaving wouldn't have been easy.
No, of course not. But it was an option. A familiar option when things got really bad, when they were desperate.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So they get to Sydney, right? Starting from scratch, basically.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Well, one of the first things you see is the development of Chinatowns.
Yeah, the Chinatown.
Yeah, those become sort of like outward signs of this growing community.
Where were they? Like, where in Sydney were these Chinatowns popping up?
Well, the very first one, it was down by the wharves, in the Rocks area.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right? Close to where they arrived.
Yeah.
But then it sort of expanded, moved over towards Belmore Market, and eventually settled in Haymarket. That's the one that really stuck around, the one we still know today.
The iconic Sydney Chinatown.
Exactly. But they weren't just places to live and shop. They were lifelines, really, for these huaqiao, new to this country, facing all these challenges.
A real sense of community, of belonging.
Absolutely. A place where they could speak their language, find familiar foods, support each other. Crucial in those early days.
And you mentioned earlier, it wasn't just about being friendly neighbors.
No, it went much deeper than that. They had these systems in place, these organizations, to help each other, protect each other.
Like those district societies and the stores you mentioned before?
Exactly. Those were absolutely key. And they operated in really interesting ways.
Tell me more about those district societies. How did they work?
Well, they were called Tongxiang.
Gongxian.
Yeah, it literally translates to same village or same district.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so people from the same area would band together.
Exactly. Which, if you think about it, is kind of different from how things worked in, like, the bigger Chinese cities.
How so?
Well, in the cities, people often organized around their jobs, their trade or profession. But for the huaqiao in Sydney, it was all about where they came from, that shared regional identity.
Ah, so like a mini Zhongshan right here in Sydney.
Basically. And that sense of obligation to each other, it was so deeply ingrained in their culture. It wasn't just geography, it was a shared responsibility.
Wow. And you said they were described as benevolent institutions.
That's what the Chinese gambling commissioners called them back in 1890.
The gambling commissioners, what did they have to do with it?
Well, they were this body, this group tasked with investigating the Chinese community here. Sort of like a watchdog, I guess.
Oh, okay.
And even they recognized that these societies, they were primarily about looking after each other. The welfare of their countrymen. That was their main focus.
Okay, so benevolent institutions, what did that actually look like in practice?
Well, a really important function, and this might sound a bit morbid, but it was taking care of the dead.
Taken care of.
Yeah, like if someone passed away, these societies would arrange for their remains to be sent back to China.
Back to their villages for burial.
Exactly. It was hugely important culturally, to be buried with your ancestors.
So even in death, they weren't forgotten. They were brought back home.
Exactly. And these societies, they would raise funds to make it happen through membership fees, donations, things like that. Wealthier merchants would often chip in a lot.
And they weren't just for funerals. Right. Those funds were used for other things, too.
Oh, absolutely. For all sorts of community support,
Yeah.
helping new arrivals, providing loans, that kind of thing. Real safety net stuff. And some of these societies, they're still around today.
Really? Like which ones?
Well, the Kunyi Tong and the Lungyi Tong, they were big ones back then. And the Lungyi Tong, it's still there.
Wow, still going strong.
Yeah, in Dixon Street, right in the heart of Chinatown. A real direct link to that past.
That's amazing. And what about those stores? You mentioned them before.
The store, yeah, those were just as important in a different way. They were like community hubs almost.
In what way?
I mean, they did it all. Provided accommodation for new arrivals.
Oh, wow. So like if you just got off the boat, you could go straight to one of these stores and find a place to stay.
Pretty much. Or if you were only here for a short while, you could rent a room. They also help people send money back home.
Remittances?
Yeah, remittances, that was huge. And they'd arrange travel, help people book passage back to China. And maybe the most important thing they did, they helped navigate all the paperwork.
Paperwork?
Yeah, all the stuff that came with the Immigration Restriction Act, applications, forms, regulations. It was a nightmare, especially if your English wasn't great.
So they were like unofficial immigration lawyers almost.
Exactly. They knew the system, they knew the loopholes, they could help people get what they needed. And some of these stores, they became really powerful.
Like which ones?
Well, Wing On and Co., that was a big one. And Onik Lee and Co., Kwang Warchong, these were major players.
And their reach, it went beyond just Sydney, right?
Way beyond. They had connections in Hong Kong, back in the villages in China. These vast networks of trust and cooperation.
Wow. I mean, it's kind of incredible how they built these networks spanning continents.
It really is. Take Sun Sam Choi, for example. That was a general merchants firm, and they had, get this, 25 partners.
25 partners.
Spread across Sydney, rural New South Wales, Hong Kong, and Canton. Just this massive web of connections.
It really shows how resourceful they were, how they could adapt and thrive in this new environment.
Absolutely. And remember those stores in the home districts? They weren't just random businesses. They were often directly linked to the ones here in Sydney, like literally branches of the same company.
Really?
Yeah. Kwang Warfong in Sheki, the main town in Zhongshan, it was a branch of the Kwang Warchong right here in Sydney.
That's amazing. This interconnectedness, it's really remarkable. But let's talk about work for a minute. What kind of jobs were these huaqiao doing to earn a living and send those remittances back home?
All sorts of things, really. It was a diverse bunch.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, you had a lot of market gardeners, growing fresh produce, supplying the city. It makes sense, right?
Yeah, got to feed everyone.
Exactly. And storekeepers, of course, running small shops, serving the community. And hawkers.
Going around selling things?
Yep, on the streets. And cooks. Lots of cooks working in restaurants.
I guess that tracks. Food is always a good business.
Always. And some were cabinet makers, skilled tradesmen.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you even had some in tobacco farming and mining in certain areas.
Wow, so pretty much everything, it sounds like. But there's a but, isn't there? You mentioned something about wages before.
Yeah, that's the tough part. In some trades, like cabinet making and cooking, there were clear wage differences between Chinese workers and European workers.
So they were being paid less for the same work.
Often, yes. And that's obviously a reflection of the racism and discrimination of the time.
Not exactly a level playing field.
No, not at all.
But they still managed to save money.
They did.
And send it back home. How did they do that? Facing lower wages, I mean.
Well, a few things helped. First, their living costs were often lower here.
How so?
Well, remember those stores we talked about? They often provided board and lodging as part of their services or even as part of your employment.
So like a built-in support system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Less money going out on rent and food. And crucially, they were super motivated. Their families back home, that was their priority.
Sending money back to support their loved ones.
Yeah, even a small amount of Australian currency could go a long way back in China. It had much more buying power in a rural economy.
I see.
And we actually know this because the gold commissioners, back in the 1890s, they did this investigation. They estimated that while the cost of feeding someone in Australia was about 4 times higher than in China.
4 times?
Yeah. But wages here were about 20 times higher.
Whoa, 20 times.
Huge difference. Even with the lower wages for Chinese workers, they could still save a significant amount.
So those remittances, they weren't just small change.
No, they could be quite substantial. And guess what? A lot of this information, this detail about wages and costs,
Yeah.
it comes straight from those Immigration Restriction Act files.
Really?
Yeah, they'd often record the occupations, sometimes even hints about their finances. It's all in there.
It's amazing what those files reveal, even unintentionally.
It really is.
So they were sending money back, but how did they actually do it? Like, how did they get the money to China?
Through those stores, of course.
The stores again. They really were the heart of everything.
They were.
Yeah.
They acted like informal banks almost. You'd deposit your earnings with the store, and they'd arrange the transfer.
Through their networks in Hong Kong and back in the villages?
Exactly. It was a system that worked. And it wasn't just money.
What else?
They'd buy things here in Sydney to take back home. You know, gifts, useful stuff.
Oh, like what?
Boiled lollies were big. And Arnott's biscuits? Apparently Scotch fingers and arrowroots were the favorites. Not so much the cream-filled ones, though.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
Yeah, and practical things, too, like umbrellas. And those big stores like Kwong Warchong, they were the main hubs for this. Though other firms like Wing On & Co., they did it too. And it's amazing.
Right.
Some of those Immigration Restriction Act files, they have these personal letters tucked away inside. And in those letters, they talk about the things they sent back. The money, the gifts. It's like these little windows into their lives.
It's incredible, isn't it? This constant back and forth, not just people, but stuff, too.
Yeah, a real flow of goods and money, all fueled by those family connections.
Speaking of family, you mentioned before that supporting their parents was a big reason they came here.
Oh, yeah, huge. While that shared district identity was important, for building those communities here, the real driving force for a lot of them was filial piety.
Filial piety.
That deep sense of duty and respect towards their parents. It's a big part of Chinese culture, and it really comes through in the records.
How so?
Well, in the applications for the certificate exempting from dictation test, the CEDT, that was the key to getting back into Australia legally.
Ah, the CET.
Yeah, in those applications, they often specifically say they need to go back to China to visit their parents. It's right there in the paperwork.
So the government knew. They understood that this was a primary motivation.
Absolutely. And we even have examples like Tommy Wei. Back in 1902, he left Sydney without the right paperwork. And the manager of Aniak and Li Ko, he had to explain to the customs officials. He said Tommy and the others, they had to go back to China to see their aging parents.
It was that important to them. Family came first.
Absolutely. Though it's interesting, later on, the reasons they gave for traveling, they shifted a bit.
To what?
Visiting wives and children.
Ah, so they'd started families back in China.
Yeah. They'd been here long enough, saved enough money, maybe gone back for a visit, gotten married, and then they had to go back to see them.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
But how often were they going back and forth? I mean, that trip wasn't cheap or easy.
No, it wasn't. And at first, the gaps between trips were pretty long, like 10 to 20 years sometimes.
Whoa, that's a long time to be away.
Yeah. But the boat fare, it was expensive. Remember, a lot of these guys, they came from poor rural backgrounds, so it took a while to save up.
And sometimes it wasn't even their own money they were saving.
Right. Sometimes their parents back home would save up for their passage, for a marriage, or just to help them get back on their feet. It was a real family effort.
And once they made that first trip back?
Things changed. They'd go back more often every 2 to 3 years, on average. And they'd stay for longer, maybe 12 to 18 months each time.
So it became a rhythm, this back and forth.
A cycle. And you can see it all in those Immigration Restriction Act files.
They really did keep track of everything, didn't they?
Oh, meticulously. Every arrival, every departure, it's all documented.
But were there any limits on how long they could stay away?
Ah, good question. Remember the CEDT, the certificate they needed to get back in.
Yeah.
Well, those often came with time limits. Like, you couldn't be gone for more than 36 months without needing an extension.
So that probably played a role in how long those return trips were.
Most likely, yeah. And those extension applications, they're another great source of information.
How's-
Well, you can see the correspondence, the reasons they gave for staying longer. It really fills in the gaps.
So all this time, the Immigration Restriction Act is in place.
Looming over everything, yeah.
It must have made things incredibly difficult for them.
Oh, it absolutely did. And it's kind of ironic,
How so?
Well, the whole point of that act was to restrict Chinese immigration.
Yeah.
But the way it was implemented, it actually made the huaqiao even more reliant on those district stores.
What do you mean?
Well, all the paperwork, the procedures, it was so complicated. Applying for those CEDTs, getting extensions, dealing with any problems upon re-entry. And if your English wasn't great,
It would have been a nightmare.
a total nightmare. So they turned to the stores for help.
Because the stores knew the system, they knew the rules.
Exactly. They became essential navigators. guides through this bureaucratic maze, and the files are full of examples. Storekeepers acting as intermediaries, writing letters, making applications on behalf of their countrymen.
Wow. So the very thing designed to keep them out actually strengthened their internal support networks.
Exactly. A real unintended consequence. And it wasn't just paperwork they had to deal with.
What else?
Well, there was the constant fear of being denied re-entry.
Even if they had lives, businesses here.
Even then, they were never truly secure. And sadly, it even led some to resort to illegal means.
Like what?
Using false papers, deserting ships, anything to avoid the official channels, because they were so afraid of being rejected.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And we see it all in the records, like Harry Chun-Fook, for example. He'd been here for years, but he had so much trouble getting back in. His case is just one of many. And the CEDT, it wasn't a one-time thing either.
What do you mean?
It had to be renewed, like a visa. And if you overstayed in China...
You had to apply for an extension.
Exactly. And guess who often helped with that?
The stores.
The stores. Like, Yod, he was away for 5 years, and he needed their help to get back.
It was like a never-ending struggle.
It was. But life goes on, right? People get older.
Yeah. So what happened to those first huaqiao? The ones that came before the act, before all this?
Well, by the 1930s, a lot of them, they were getting up there in years. And you see this trend, more and more of them making these final trips back to China.
To retire in their home villages.
Exactly. They'd spent their lives working here, sending money back. And now it's time to go home.
To finally rest.
Yeah. But at the same time, there was a new generation coming in.
After 1901. But wasn't immigration restricted?
It was, but there were ways around it. Some came with temporary certificates of exemption.
Oh, like special permits.
Kind of. They were for specific reasons, like students...
Coming to study.
Yeah. Or substitutes filling in for workers who'd gone back to China. Or assistants helping out in Chinese-run businesses here.
Yeah.
And then there were those born in Australia.
Australian-born Chinese?
Yep. A new generation growing up in this new country, and they had their own connection to China.
Did they keep up that back and forth, that sojourning thing?
Not always in the same way. It was different for them.
How so?
Well, those on certificates of exemption, they had stricter conditions. Their visas weren't as secure as the old domicile guys.
So they couldn't just come and go as they pleased.
Right. Going back to China was harder, riskier. Like Yuk Kwan, he was a newspaper worker here, came on one of those temporary certificates, and he had real trouble getting back to China to visit.
Because his stay here was temporary, so going away was a big deal.
Exactly. And then the Australian-born Chinese, their experiences were all over the map.
In what way?
Well, some of them, their mothers took them back to China to be raised while their fathers worked here.
Wow. So they grew up in the villages.
Yeah, and then trying to get back to Australia to their fathers, it was a whole other challenge. We see this with Billy Chi Hoon and John Louis Hoon. Their files tell that story. It's really fascinating.
2 different pathways, 2 different sets of challenges.
Exactly. But then, of course, the world gets turned upside down.
World War II.
Yeah. The Japanese invasion of China and Hong Kong, that threw everything into chaos.
Those connections, already fragile, must have been devastated.
They were. Travel became almost impossible for years. And the Australian government, they stopped issuing CEDTs altogether between 1941 and 1945.
Because of the war?
Yeah, so those who were here, they couldn't go back. And those back in China, they were cut off. No more remittances, no more visits. It was a really hard time.
A dark time.
Yeah. And even after the war ended, things were different.
How so?
Well, China had changed. First, the Kuomintang, then the communists, they took over and they started centralizing things, including remittances.
So you couldn't just go through those district stores anymore.
No, the government wanted to control that flow of money. They set up the Bank of China to handle it.
So the stores, they lost that crucial role.
Gradually, yeah. And those long sojourns, those back and forth trips, they became less and less common.
A whole way of life disappearing.
It was. By the mid-20th century, the last of the old domicile generation, they made their final trips back to China to retire for good.
The end of an era.
It really was.
Right.
Guys like Yang Xing, Sun Li, they were part of that last wave. And for the next generation, the focus shifted.
How so?
Bringing their families here to Australia, or making shorter, less frequent visits back to the villages, more like nostalgic trips, you know.
Like Arthur Chang, Cliff Lee, Victor Gao. You mentioned them before.
Yeah, they represent that new reality, still connected, but in a different way.
It's incredible, really, how much we can learn from those Immigration Restriction Act files.
I know, right? Who knew these bureaucratic records would be so revealing?
And you said they were a primary source for this whole story, for this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely. They're foundational. They give us all this amazing detail.
Like what kind of detail? What can we actually learn from them?
Oh, so much. Each file, it's like a little biography.
Really?
Yeah, you get their full name in English and Chinese, date and place of birth, when they arrived in Australia, when they left, how long they were gone.
Wow.
And their families back in China, wives, children, their names are all listed. And their jobs, what they did here, where they lived. Some of the files even go back before Federation, before 1901.
So we can trace their lives for decades.
We can, and sometimes, and this is really cool,
Yeah.
there are photos, actual photos of these people. It's amazing to put a face to a name. And all these records, they're at the National Archives of Australia in series like SP421 and SP11221. If anyone wants to do their own digging, those are the places to start.
It's kind of mind-blowing that these files, meant to keep people out, are now helping us understand their lives so intimately.
I know, right? It's like this accidental archive of their experiences.
And even though they were created for, discriminatory reasons,
Absolutely.
they give us this incredible data. Hard numbers, statistics.
Oh, tons of it. By analyzing all those CEDT applications, the registers, you can really see the big picture, the demographics of the community, how they moved between Australia and China, what kinds of jobs they did.
It's like the individual stories build up into this grand narrative.
Exactly. And our sources, they actually have these appendices filled with tables and charts. Like Appendix 3, it breaks down the occupations, shows how they were spread out across Sydney and beyond. It's really fascinating to see those patterns emerge.
But you mentioned earlier, it's not always easy to interpret these records.
Yeah.
Like with the names and origins.
Yeah, that can be tricky.
How come?
Well, for one, the way they Romanized Chinese names back then, it was all over the place.
Romanized.
Turning the Chinese characters into English letters. There was no standard system, so the same name could be spelled 10 different ways.
Oh, wow, that makes things confusing.
Very. And then there's a whole thing with personal names versus clan names.
What's that about?
Well, a lot of the huaqiao, they gave their personal names to the officials, not their family names, like we do today. It was a cultural thing. Especially in those small villages where everyone had the same few surnames.
So it was easier to just use your given name.
Exactly. Like you might have a whole village of Longs, but everyone knows each other by their personal names.
So if you're looking for a specific family in the records, it could be a real headache.
Oh, it can be. And then there's this thing with the prefix.
The prefix.
Yeah, they'd add in front of names, like moy, yat. It was super common.
That's interesting. Why?
It's a bit of a mystery, honestly. Maybe it was a way of showing respect or just a habit from the dialect they spoke. But it was so common, the customs officials even had separate sections in their registers for names.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it was that prevalent.
So trying to piece together these stories from the records, it must be like solving a puzzle.
Oh, it totally is. But that's where the oral histories come in.
It's Appendix 2 in our sources, right?
Yeah. Those interviews, they give us the human side of the story. The emotions, the motivations, the stuff you don't get from a government form.
It makes it real, relatable.
Okay, thank you very much for that. As usual, a nice summary. But the book itself contains a lot more details. Because it was a thesis originally, it does also include quite a lot of statistics, easily read in tables to give you an idea of proportions and a bit of analysis of what things are going on. So if you're interested in that, if you'd like to purchase a copy, just write to ChideStudy Press at gmail.com or go to the website and click on it. You can read, I think the AO summary is also there on the website. I'll perhaps be doing some more podcasts to go in a bit more detail later on. I haven't decided whether I'll do that or not, but I think this one was quite useful. So if you want to ask any questions or make any queries about it, don't hesitate to get in touch. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this and other podcasts. Thank you very much. This is Michael Williams. Goodbye.